What's up, guys? Now we're gonna talk about Laravel routes. Without further delay, let's get started. So now I'm gonna talking about basic routing. So let's go with basic routing. So first, I will give you an example. So this is the very basic, like a closure route. So like for example, the route. So actually this is just the same with initialize route. So route get greeting and function. Let's say function and return hello world. So actually, guys, this is the always text that we're gonna adding, especially on when developers started to write a new code. Okay, so let's see and test this grading. So we should be able to see the hello world, boom. Okay, as you can see, we have this hello world text, and now we have this very basic route. Okay, so let's move forward. So let's try to call a specific route with controller. Okay, with a controller, it's a connection between a route and a controller. Okay, so let's try to write a route get, let's say user. Okay, so we have now the URL as a user, and then we have the controller name, controller class. Okay, so class. So let's say we just need to point the user into index of the user controller. So first we will have, of course, this user error. Okay, because we have unexpected. Okay, let's say, okay, we have this error because user controller does not exist yet. So we need to create that user controller, which we artisan. In order to create, we need to run this command, artisan make controller. Okay, user controller. So that should do the job. So now you can check on app http, and then we have this controller, user controller. So what we are gonna do, so we just need to copy the namespace. Okay, so we have this namespace, and then just call the controller name and just add this class. And then what method are you gonna use, or are you gonna pointing for this user URL? Okay, so let's go, let's create. So first, if we are gonna run this, missing index.php, target user controller does not exist. So let's save this and let's run this again. Index controller index does not exist. So the index function does not exist. So let's write this index function, public function index request. Okay, so we have now this index function. So let's reload this. So it should be looking good. So no content. So let's just return hello user index. So when we run it again, we should be able to see the text hello user index. Okay, perfect. So looks good and looks great. So as you can see, we have this URL, and then we have this controller, and we pointed the index function. Okay, so let's try to create another method. Like for example, let's say show. Okay, so this show, you can just let's say ID. Okay, ID. So now this route gonna do is that we need to input a user URL, and we need to input an ID of the user. Okay, so this will do the job. So let's go to the show method. Let's create a show method. So as you can see, let's just try to add a ID here. So that should show an error. Okay, show does not exist. Okay, so let's create another method here, public function show ID. Okay, so return ID, and when we run it again, when reload, the 1 will show up because we have this ID on our parameter. So let's say this is the user ID. So when we run it again, we have this ID on the screen, and it says this is the user ID. When we change this to 1234, we have this 1234 ID. Once we remove this ID, it should fall into the index. Okay? So now let's try with route. Let's say post. So user, let's say just user, and let's just copy this. Okay, and let's say store. Now this time we are going to store a data from the post request. Okay, so let's say we need to post this. How to post this? We need to create a UI for that in order to test the post functionality. So now basically we just need to create a UI, and then we can execute this post functionality. So now let's just create a very simple UI. So let's say we will create form here. This is just for the example purposes. Okay, so we will create a input type text, and then name is like, for example, full name. And let's create a type submit, and the value would be submit. Okay, once we reload this user, that should show a input text and submit button. Okay, so when we hit submit, that should, let's say, expired. So we need to add the CSRF token input type, let's say hidden, and let's say value on the name would be token. Okay, and then the value would be CSRF token. Okay, perfect. So let's try this out, and let's see if we're gonna get a CSRF token. So we have this CSRF token, as you can see, and then once we hit submit, there should be a result. Okay, so as you can see, we have does not exist. Controller store does not exist. Okay, so now let's create a store method, because as you can see, we have, when we submit this user, then it should go to post, because you're posting a user, so it should be a store. So let's create a store here, public function store request. Okay, so now let's dump the request all. So let's go again and hit reload. We have now the full name as null. So let's input my full name. Let's say John Doe. So my full name is now John Doe. So we should be able to see now the full name as John Doe. So as we can see, the post is now working. We are doing the die dump here for all the requests. So, okay, that's how the post works in our route. Now let's go with update route patch user. So let's say the patch is update. Okay, so we just need to have the specific ID for us to update the specific user. Okay, so we just need to add ID, of course, ID. So now let's just copy this code above and update. Okay, so let's go. Let's create this method update ID. So now this is our ID that we're going to pass in our parameter. Okay, so now let's create a UI for this patch method. Okay, so let's just go to, like for example, because you can only patch when you have this existing user. Okay, so you can only update the user if the user does exist on your application. Okay, so let's go back and convert this show method into a UI. Okay, so now let's just copy and okay, so let's say value John do. Okay, so now let's just copy this hidden our method. We can just type method and then the method would be patch. Sounds great. So now let's change this to maybe update, and let's try it again. So we have now this update method, and once we hit this update button, we should fall under this patch, under this update method. Patch. So let's go back and reload and then hit update button. Okay, we do not have the D function. Okay, we need to use die dump. So as you can see, we are now falling under the patch route. Okay, patch route under the update method. Okay, so as you can see, this is for storing and this is for updating. So now let's go back and let's die dump this data. So as you can see, let's die dump this and let's say echo okay, so let's say store and let's go back. So update. So we have this patch, and once we remove this, so we can just add John do. We should be able to go to the store method. Okay, sounds great and perfect. So now let's go with the delete. Okay, delete. So now how we can delete the specific entry of the user? So we need to display all the users from our server. So now let's create a simple, very simple UI. This is just actually all in the function, in the method of controller. So this is not actually the recommended way of your UI. You need to create a view for that. Okay, that is can be tackled in my next video or in my other tutorial. So now we can just create a simple UI for the list of users so that we can delete those users. Okay, so now let's create like John do, and let's say Jane do. Okay, so we have this too. It's not showing. So okay, I am able to add this into the show method. So now let's move this to the index method. So we have now John do and Jane do. So as you can see, we have these two users, and we need to add a functionality how to delete this user. Okay, so now we need to add here somewhere in this area like label. Okay, so just a label, and let's say delete. Okay, so delete. Okay, so delete. So now we need to create another label for Jane Do. Okay, we have now the delete. So let's just add few colors. Okay. This example, guys, is very basic. Okay. So now we do not have this functionality. If we click this, we do not have a functionality to delete a specific entry. So now let's create a form for each user for us to be able to delete for the specific entry. Okay, this is post. So let's just say change that to button, and then let's say, okay, so let's reload, and we should be able to see a button. Okay. Let's try this. Okay. And let's go with another label. So you can see, we have now this delete button. When we click this one, it should be, so we need to add the CSRF token. Okay. So CSRF token, then CSRF token. Okay, reload. Once we hit delete button, then we should be able to go to store. But in this case, we need to add the method. Okay, so we just need to add the method as delete. Okay, so let's go and add paste. Okay, and in the very button, another delete button, we need to add this delete method. So now let's go and reload, and then hit delete button. Okay, so let's go and check the route. Okay, let's go create the delete route, and we will create the delete route, and then let's say destroy. So let's try it again. So let's say user 1. Okay, so let's add a user 1 here. User 1. Okay, destroy does not exist, so we just need to add this user 1 and user 2, because on our route we have this delete method that it requires an ID, so we need to know whose user we need to delete. Okay, so, and also we pointed the function as destroy inside user controller. So now let's create this method. Public, we can say ID, and echo delete, then ID, delete this ID, user ID. Okay, so now let's try it again. Let's go back to our users list, and then let's delete Jandu. Okay, delete this ID number 1. Okay, let's go and delete Jane Do. So delete this ID number 2. Our delete is now perfectly working fine. These are our 5 routes that we are commonly using, especially in doing CRUD or doing your application, adding, deleting, and stuff like that. These are very important to be in our applications. So now these are the basic common route that we are gonna be using. So now guys, that's it for now. And thank you so much for watching, especially from the very beginning up to the end. So don't forget to like, subscribe my channel, and hit the notification bell for more videos. And thank you so much guys, and see you on my next video.